This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. My guest today is someone I've known for a very long time, namely Solveig Overby, and she's the daughter of good friends Charles and Ruth Overby. So Solveig is here helping her parents, who are getting pretty long in years, right? Solveig, and it's very nice that you can come as often as you do. And you have a kind of job that makes that possible, right?
Well, and I've just recently done an early retirement to help me with a little bit of the time that I need. So I'm doing a transition, yes.
Yes. But where are you living now?
I live in Burlington, Vermont.
Burlington, Vermont. Well, my goodness, you must know our famous candidate from Vermont, or know of him.
I do. I get asked about him all the time, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
And I have actually shared the back seat of an airplane with him coming back from Washington, D.C.
My goodness.
For an hour and a half. So he took the last seat in the row, the last row in the seat.
Right. Well, that was perhaps before he was campaigning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, because, of course, he was a congressman and then a senator, right?
Yes, he started as mayor of Burlington, and then he was a congressman, and then he was a senator. That's where she is now.
So his home really is in Burlington itself?
Yes, his home is in Burlington. He was handing out Halloween candy this year.
Oh, my.
To the kids.
Well, we're going to talk about various other things, and the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what is your birthday?
My birthday is August 30th, 1954.
Okay, and August 30th, according to my book here, which I often use, is by Kirsten Olson, Remember the Ladies, something that Mrs. Adams famously said to her husband. I'm not too sure he really followed through on that, but anyway. August 30th is the birthday of Mary Shelley. And I told you who Mary Shelley was, right?
Yes, she wrote Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
I did not remember that.
Right, right. Well, one often doesn't remember the actual names of people. But she was born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. That was her name. Her mother was the famous women's rights author, Mary Wollstonecraft, and her father was a well-known philosopher in England at the time named Godwin. But then she married the poet Shelley, and so that's quite a person to share your birthday with.
I'm going to have to do some research on that because I didn't know that.
Right, you'll have to find out more about her.
I'm going to have to look at this book. It's a great looking book.
Yes, this is, well, actually this was published in the 1990s, so it doesn't have any really women of today in it, you might say, but it has a lot of interesting women of yesterday.
Good place to start.
Yes. So now we were talking about your experience as a 4-H leader in Burlington, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us some more about that?
One of the things that I found that's an interest to me, of mine, is that why some people learn and some people sort of shut down. And one of the things that led me to working with 4-H in Burlington was seeing kids that were inside on a beautiful day. And I found that I learned about the 4-H learning model by having a 4-H group in an urban environment, probably one of few. And they have an experiential learning model, which I think is applicable to all learning. And in Burlington, the group that I had were third grade to fifth graders, and they turned out to be, when they showed up, it was about trees and learning about trees, primarily a group of little Muslim girls that were in the elementary school down the street from me.
I see.
It was a wonderful experience for us, and we planted trees and we did a bunch of things. But I've actually since latched on to using that experiential learning model as an important.
I think that we have a shot
graphic?
of that, a graphic of that, which is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of thing, isn't it?
And the way that it works is that you provide the kids with a project, and you don't really explain, you don't teach them how to do it. You give them a problem and a project, and then they experience that. And then the second stage, so experiencing it's the first stage. The second stage is they discuss among themselves, well, what's working, what's not working, and you've seen kids trying to solve a problem. When they talk about it, and you encourage that, and you try to ask questions. Then you work through trying to analyze, well, why did it, when you finally got it working and you figured it out, how did it work? What about it worked? That was the third stage. And then the fourth and the fifth really relate to looking at helping them understand what they learned in a way that they can generalize it to other parts of their life, and so and then eventually apply it. So it's really an important model for anybody learning anything, frankly. And when I have people trying to learn computer things, which is my background, I find that I say, what's the problem that you want to solve with the computer program, and then you can work with the software that would help you solve that problem. But until you actually have a problem you need to experience, and then you discuss why is it working or not, and you work through, you can't really easily learn programming, let's say, without that experiential learning model.
So you mentioned computers, and that's really your job, is working with computers.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, for about 25 years, I have worked at the Federal Prosecutor's Office in Vermont as the systems administrator. And then I did a project in Washington, D.C. for the headquarters office relating to document automation. So I spent 2.5 years working on that. So my role was, my training, actually I'm trained as a lawyer and I'm registered and licensed as a lawyer in Vermont, but my role was to assist lawyers in doing their job, and all that technology, whether it's email or typing in a word processor or doing data analysis, or frankly putting on a trial. Remember the O.J. Simpson trial that people were familiar with? It was one of the early stages of electronically presenting evidence.
It was in the early 1990s, I believe.
Yes, and so I was early on, I actually started the job before there was a computer on anybody's desk as a lawyer. So my role has been trying to help people that are lawyers and paralegals and legal assistants to use their tools well. And it's been an interesting challenge because there's some lawyers get frustrated with some of the things that they have to do, and a lot of them didn't know how to type.
And that transition, how to type, that's...
the transition from the yellow pad and the dictation cassette, that the secretary would use the foot pedal and, reverse and transcribe. I was there when that was the way things were done, and then I've since tried to move on to document automation, which is really looking at, it's almost an artificial intelligence expert system for drafting documents that are mostly the same but have interchangeable parts to them. And so I've been trying to get that going in the U.S. Attorney's offices across the country.
Right, so you're trained as a lawyer and as a computer scientist, and this is what you've been able to use over the years.
Yes, I was very fortunate that this position came about when they decided to provide attorneys with computers in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Vermont. And they needed a systems person to sort of help behind the curtain with the computers and the hardware and the software and wiring things together. And so I started my job in 1990.
1990.
And and things were very different, and it's gone through many different changes and multiple changes of computers and software and...
Yes, there are so many. Well, I started working with computers in the 1970s, and things were really primitive then.
Like punch cards?
Punch cards, right. And when I first started, unfortunately, you had to have like 79 correct punches. If you made a mistake on 75, tough, you had to start all over from scratch.
I did that too. That was my first computer class. I know exactly what you mean. And leaving them at the Clippinger lab there and looking at the turnaround time, 30 minutes to get your deck of cards back. I know that. That was where we started the programming. I totally get that.
I started my master's in government or political science in 1969. And then we went away on a sabbatical for a year to England. And when I came back, David DeBelco had been hired, and he was the first person who was teaching computer science at Ohio University. Did you ever have Dave DeBelco?
That name doesn't sound familiar,
Right.
no.
Well, he was the first one, so he was the one that, and then...
What year was that then?
It must have been 71, I would say.
Okay, I was there between 72 and 76.
I see, okay. Well, it's important to have technology keeps changing. In fact, sometimes you have the feeling it changes too often, too fast, because no sooner do you have something, as in our case, recorded on a cassette, then suddenly there are discs. And now there's something new, I'm not sure what, maybe those little drives that you can put in.
A thumb drive, right?
A thumb drive. And
USB
then
drive.
that's just in the last years that I've been working here, almost nine going on 10 years, that much change in the technology. So that the first people that I taped, the first women that I taped for, are frozen on cassettes, shall we say, because the technology has changed. And soon the discs will be obsolete too.
That's a big challenge for the National Archives and Records Administration that manages all of the records of government, including the records that would have been the records of the work that is done in the offices that I was working with. And it is a big challenge, and including the formats that obviously the hardware that was used to read cassettes, there's not a lot of people that still have the hardware to even play them. And so they have require you to almost roll them over to the new technology each time. But you're absolutely right that the changes are scary. And the amount of transition now from all the software living on your computer to all the software living on a server somewhere that you have no control over, that is owned by a commercial entity called, in the cloud. And then you have, it's easier for them to maintain and change software, but you are pretty much out of luck. It's not in your control. You require a network connection.
Well, you mentioned also that a number of the lawyers that you've worked with don't have typing skills, so they couldn't use the personal computers that have the typing keyboard readily. And I can imagine what that's like, because I went through college myself not knowing how to type, just sort of hunt and peck style. That's a bad thing. And so I made sure my kids learned typing in middle school and didn't have to wait. What I finally did was, after I finished college and went to New York and got a job as a file clerk, which was the only thing I was competent to do as a history major probably, was I went night school to a business college and learned to type. And that's very important. But what I don't know is the new technology. And there are people today who insist that you not talk to them, but you text them. And it seems to me like it must be very difficult to sit there and you're not using the typing skill.
It's frustrating. I know. I had a BlackBerry model kind of smartphone, which has the typing texting thing, and it had tactile keys on it. And then I switched to the kind that most people have, the iPhone, the Apple iPhone brand, and it's very much just a keyboard that's displaying on their front of the phone. And it is very challenging for people, like me, to actually do that as well. And there's techniques, there's software that you can sort of drag your finger around and it will actually, but it is difficult, but people, most kids
And the
don't
young
use the
kids,
telephone.
the kids know this. I mean,
Right.
they're used to doing it. Like I say, there are people who insist that they must be text. Don't send them a vocal message at all.
Right, or email. They're not using email as much as the texting.
Right, yeah, that's true. Well, that's part of the whole problem of technology, shall we say. And I earlier asked you your birthday, and now I want to talk about early memories. And I'll start with mine. I have a picture, I believe, that was taken. It's difficult sometimes to see what the picture looks like, but Matt is going to bring it up, I think. Matt?
There it is. Well,
There it is. Well, and it's difficult to tell what it is, but it's actually me at about age 11 months, and I'm sitting in a wash basin. There I am sitting in a wash basin on a step, and you can see it's kind of ratty-looking territory there, and ratty-looking step and so on. It's out west. My parents moved from New York City to southern Nevada when I was 9 months old. And so that's me at that age, a long, long time ago. And the early experience that I want to mention, the earliest thing I can remember, I think I was about 2.5 at the time. I remember walking away down the road from Pahrump. We lived at a place called Pahrump, which is halfway between Las Vegas and Death Valley, just almost in California, right on the Nevada line. And I was about 2.5, and I remember how hot the sand was as I was walking down the road, you know. And then suddenly I saw a man coming toward me on a horse. Well, this man realized that I shouldn't be out there, you know. So he stopped and put me on the horse and took me home. And about that time, they realized I wasn't around, you know, and were starting to look. What could she have done? Where could she have gone? Dolly was my nickname. And I want to show a later picture which relates to this early time. It actually says "Hello, Dolly" on it.
that's great.
Which I got from Carol Patterson when she put on "Hello, Dolly" during the time I was on the school board in the 1980s. What I have in my hands are baskets. Those are baskets, Indian baskets from Pahrump. The smaller one that's in my right hand, I guess, yeah. I still have today. It was made, I think, perhaps especially for me. And the Indians down in that territory often wore a basket on their head. I think maybe it was to use, you know, for food and things, for water even, because it's very closely woven. And the women would wear these baskets on their heads, and it's quite a small basket, so it was probably for me as a baby. And the other one is a larger one, and that was given to me by a lady who visited Pahrump and remembered me. And 50 years later, we reconnected. It was really wonderful. And she sent me her basket. Well, after she passed on, I sent the basket back to her daughter because I was sure her daughter had grown up with that basket that her mother had had for 50 years.
So you had quite a bit of interaction with the native people
Yes,
around where you
I
lived?
had an Indian nursemaid, I guess you would call her, and I'm still in touch with her family, the Jim family. In fact, Alice Jim only passed away about 4 or 5 years ago, and she was in her late 80s then. But I'm still in touch with one of her sisters in southern Nevada, and so she's someone that I remember quite well. Well,
Different
what about
than Ohio.
What about your old or earliest memory?
Oh, I wonder, a lot of my memories I've sort of blotted out. However, my sister and I, it's a big joke between us. But I was racking my brains for some ideas, and I think sometimes you wonder if it's a memory you remember or somebody told you about later when you're older. But I do remember an incident where I was a little kid, and I thought I went to visit some friends that had a nice rock collection. And I remember thinking, oh, I really like that little green rock. And I picked it up and decided I was going to, on the walk home, decide I'd found it near a tree.
Oh.
Well,
someone noticed, perhaps.
My parents noticed that doesn't look quite right. And I was asking my mother about that today. And she remembered the names of the family. And she said, you must have been about 3 or 4. But the point of it is, I remember being marched back to the house and sent up to the front door with that and apologizing and returning it. And I will never forget that experience.
Right. Well, I think most children have an experience like that. I can remember going next door. I must have been about 8 or 9 at the time, going next door, and they always offered me a cookie, Well, I was by myself in the kitchen one day. No one had offered me a cookie yet, but I saw the cookies were there, and so I took one, of course. And I guess I wasn't caught in the act, but my children were. And I'm sure they remember those experiences because, of course, what you have to do is what your parents did. You have to take the child back and tell them to apologize and give it back. Mm-hmm. And we lived near the grocery store down on Stimson when the A&P was there. So I remember it's kind of easy to pick up certain things the kids don't have. Mm-hmm. Where did you get that pack of gum? That kind of thing.
Right.
And having to go back, apologize, give it back, and pay for it out of their allowance, Mm-hmm. And that happened with each of my children. It was always something like a pack of gum, but it was never anything really costly, but it was so hard for them. But I think that's a good way for a child to learn.
That was the technique, obviously. But I still love rocks. My house is full of rocks, so I've never gotten over the love of rocks.
Oh, yes.
I have tons of rocks. But then I also had a memory, I was thinking, well, that one's a little bit, little bit more stressful to think about. But I had a school, an elementary school, that was at the bottom of a ski hill. Mm-hmm. And I would be able to walk to school, and at the top of the hill we would leave pieces of cardboard. And in the winter, it was in Wisconsin, and I could always zoom down the hill on a piece of cardboard to get to school.
And that was sort of like a sled.
It was like a sled. And I had a friend who had more money than me. There was a very wealthy neighborhood, and I was in a student apartments with my dad was in grad school. Mm-hmm. But I remember riding the cardboard down next to the ski jump, and my friend actually had skis and boots, and she would be able to use the ski jump. Obviously, I wasn't so. It was fine. Well, later, she actually went off the ski jump and broke her arm, and I said, "Well, I guess that's just as well. I wasn't doing that."
Right.
The cardboard works just fine for me.
Well, I remember when we moved here to Ohio from Maine, and the first Christmas we were here, our kids were like, well, Alice was not 2 yet, and David, who was soon going to have his 55th birthday, David was 3, and Dick, who went to kindergarten right here in Morrison School, was 5, and Santa brought a sled. What do you suppose happened? It did not snow once after Christmas that year.
How sad.
That was sad, but that's life. There are certain things you cannot anticipate. There are certain things that happen that you can't change, aren't there?
Yes. And we had our sled story of my being a 5-year-old and being pointed on the sled, face down, pointing down the hill, and there was a brick building over there, not close, but of course the steering on a sled is a little different than you might expect. So if you want to go that way, you don't push on the left side. Well, I was very good at being able to steer myself face first into the brick building.
Oh dear.
I survived, but my parents were like, roll off. I
Did
didn't know
the
to roll
sled
off.
survive?
The sled survived, absolutely. The nails all popped up, so your jacket would always get ripped when you did lay on it face first and sled. But it was a wonderful sled. We have it to this day. We still have the
Do you
sled. We
really?
still have the sled.
Rosebud.
I think, yeah, it might be that what it was. I don't remember. It's or flyer,
Well,
flexible flyer.
Flexible flyer. Well, Rosebud is the, you know, in the famous movie, what was it that the old man said as he was dying? He said, Rosebud. And the people were trying to find out, what is Rosebud? Who is Rosebud? Where is it? You know, that sort of thing. And they didn't find out. They burned a lot of things at the so-called Hearst Castle. It was a story based on Hearst, but of course he had a different name. And the last thing they showed was the sled burning up. And as a child, he had lived in California or Colorado or, you know, someplace where there were mountains and snow and so forth. And when they struck it rich and they sent this boy away to a good school and so forth, he had been out sledding. He'd been out having a good time in nature, and his life changed forever. But he still had the sled, but nobody realized that that's what it was.
That's what he meant.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of that name. It's that famous movie from about 1940, which some people think is the greatest movie that was ever made.
I don't know what
By
that is.
Orson Welles. By Orson Welles.
Citizen Kane?
Yeah.
There you go.
Citizen Kane. Yeah.
Don't remember the Rosebud scene.
Yeah.
Think we'll
Well,
have
it's
to
the
watch.
very last thing, you know. But that was sort of the story throughout. This man was trying to find out what Rosebud was, and he was interviewing all these different people who had known this man, Citizen Kane. Well, anyway, we're getting
All right.
kind of far away from things. I see you brought some books for us to share.
We had talked a little bit about some of the things that would be interesting, and I was wanting to make sure that people really paid attention to a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
The
And
New Jim Crow.
The New Jim Crow.
By Michelle
Alexander.
Okay.
And the subtitle is Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. And the reason that this is relevant to me is that, and it's very relevant in the last few years, this was written and published in 2010, 2012, but Michelle Alexander has talked about the fact that our mass incarceration system has actually replaced the Jim Crow system as far as creating a racial caste system in the United States. And she's actually a law professor at Ohio State University. Her husband is the head federal prosecutor, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. His name is Carter Stewart, which I discovered reading the acknowledgments in the book. I did not know that. But however, this book is very relevant to what's been going on with all of the camera incidents of catching police brutality, but it also relates to the fact that we have switched. Her theory and her thesis is that we have changed from using race as the way to discriminate against people and put them into a caste to criminality. And when the war on drugs happened, starting in the early '80s. It was somewhat calculated in her mind to create another alternate mechanism to use to discriminate against people without using the racial method. And so if you look at the amount of people that we have incarcerated, and you know that it's whatever, 10 times more people are incarcerated in the United States per capita than in any other country of the world.
Yeah, we are the #1 imprisoner.
We're the #1, and this is really an important thing to think about. And there's an organization in Vermont called, I'm trying to think the exact name of it, but basically Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform. Mm-hmm. And the point is that we really can't incarcerate people, and then once we've done that, we've pretty much branded them that we can then discriminate against them. You'll notice if you're a felon in many places you can't vote anymore, and on any job application form or application for an apartment or all the things that you'd want to, in the old days, under the Jim Crow system, you could discriminate against people you wanted to if it was a racial basis. Mm-hmm. All those things now, if you have to check the box, that I have a felony conviction, they can legally discriminate against you. And so her thesis is that we have now changed over to using that, and then we just need, so it's an incredible, important book for people to read. And I want, since you're in Ohio, and she's a law professor in Columbus, and her husband is the federal prosecutor in Columbus, I think it's an incredible piece of work.
You say it's just out recently.
No, this book has been out since 2010, 2012. The copyright's 2012, okay. 2010. But I know she's been getting a lot of people going, aha, now that we've had all the Fergusons, the situations where they've been recorded, her work is finally being recognized in a very big way. And that's why I think it's been on my list to read. I haven't read through the whole thing. I've been trying to get it out of the library, and finally I had to buy a copy because it was just always checked out. Right. So that was why I brought that book.
The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
Yeah, and it relates to not only, education isn't the only way. We say education helps people to, bring themselves up by their bootstraps. And we're colorblind now. We don't worry about, race is done. We've got Obama as a black president where everything's good. But in fact, education is not enough, even using an experiential model. So it's all related. The other things I brought is I happen to be fortunate enough, and sadly at this point, travel to Syria. In 2009.
In 2009?
I went to Syria in 2009.
What took you there, Solveig?
I've been involved in a theater group in Vermont, and one of the people in the theater group is married to a Syrian, a Kurdish Syrian. Oh. And he lives in Damascus, and they were running groups of people. They would invite people to go to Syria. She had people wanting to come and stay in Damascus, and so I had been wanting to go to Turkey, and I thought people were dropping out because it was right around the time a lot of unrest in Jerusalem in the Palestinian area. There was
in 2009, but before the war.
It was before the war, so I had a wonderful experience of the people there, and it's a beautiful place. There's wonderful people, and the thing I find shocking about the news coverage is people don't really know how secular and open to all religious backgrounds they've always been. It's painted as it's a Sunni, Shia arguments. They have always been very open to all religions, and it's from the broad spectrum. So I found it was just amazing to me what's been. I look at the news in ways that are probably very different from experiencing the Syrian people.
I wanted to show you this book that I have, which dates back some 60 years. It's called Muhammad's People, and it's by Eric Schroeder. But he wrote a book which is essentially a series of documents from Muslim history, starting, before the Prophet Muhammad, but about the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the early 7th century. He died in 632, so he was active in the early 7th century. And the reason I have it is that at the University of Michigan in 1950s, I had a colleague, a fellow student, I should say, who was from Iraq, and his name was Muhammad Rida. And I was able to help him a little bit with, he was writing a thesis, you know, and not being a native English speaker, he asked me as a friend, you know, a friendly student. We both had the same teacher. I was the research assistant for Dr. Claude Egertson at the University of Michigan College of Education at the time, and Muhammad Rida was there from Iraq working on a thesis. So I helped him some with English, you know, because we have so many things that are not obvious that are special terms and
idiomatic
that kind
kinds of things.
Yes, idiomatic sometimes is a problem for the non-English speaker. Anyway, he asked me what I would like as a reward for this, you know, and I said it would be nice to have a book about Islam, and this is what he gave me. So it's...
I saw you had an Arabic inscription as
yeah,
well.
I do. I don't even know what it says. I've never known what it said. But one of the interesting things about this is, like I say, that's 60 years ago now. After the war in Kuwait in 1991, I ran into Dr. Rida again. He was a refugee, you might say, in the United States. Because for many years, although he was Iraqi, he had been working in Kuwait with education. And he had a large family, they all lived there, you know, and so on. Well, after the war, as you know, Iraqis were not popular in Kuwait. Even someone who'd lived there for 20 years and had, you know, been an important educational expert and so on, and so he had to leave. And he came to the States, and I met him in Columbus. I remember the day exactly. I can't remember the year and the day, but I remember the time of the day, because after we met in Columbus and had tea or something like that, you know, I was going back down to Hocking County to the retreat that the Unitarian women used to have. In fact, it was the first time we had that retreat up at Camp, well, anyway. But off the main drag, not right on 33. It was one of those back roads someplace. By then it was dark, you know. And I had a terrible time trying to find this camp. So I finally stopped, and what would be open at 9 o'clock at night, you know, dark night, but a bar. So, of course, I'm from Nevada. I mean, bars are places where everyone does all sorts of things, especially things like if you're going on a bus, you know, at least in the old days when I was young. Often the place you would stop would be a bar someplace. So I never thought twice about going into a bar, although I'm not really a drinker. I don't care for the taste even. But one of my friends said, "What? You went into a bar to get directions?" And I said, "Why, of course, I'm from Nevada." So that was the same day that I saw, after many years, that would have been about 45, 50 years, I saw Muhammad Rida again. And he gave me this very interesting book, which has a picture and a map of the Middle East.
At what time of it? So that was printed in 1955,
It
right?
was, this book was written,
Copyright.
published in 1955. It was brand new when he gave it to me, and that is 60 years ago. So
there's the map.
the map shows, I believe, this one, actually. First, I should show this map. This shows the ancient Near East, and you see the Mediterranean Sea, that blue part over there on the left side of the screen. And here's Egypt down below it, and next to it, the little bits of the Red Sea and the Sinai Peninsula. In other words, this is the ancient Levant along in here. This is today Lebanon, and south of it Israel.
Do you know why it's called the Levant, where that word came from?
I think it means east.
Okay. I've always wondered.
Someone told me that it was something like meant east.
Okay.
But, and this shows Damascus, and that's where you went, isn't it?
I was in Damascus, and I was in Ebla, I was in Ugarit, and let's see, and I was in Palmyra, and I was also in Aleppo, which they have obviously different names. It's interesting
Different
that these are names obviously that are Americanized a little bit, but yes.
Right, and these are it's a map of the ancient Near East, so some of these are, the ones in red, for instance, are ancient names. Here's Canaan, for instance, which appears in the Bible. You know, the Jews who left with Moses and went to Sinai, crossed the Red Sea, you know, according to the biblical story. Right. They were headed for the land of Canaan, which is part of today's Israel.
Right.
This is this little tiny blue thing inside next to Canaan is the Dead Sea.
Okay.
That's the Dead Sea. And this little, I think there's a little lake up here, which is the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus was raised, they say.
Well, one of the things that you notice, Ugarit is on the map, actually up near Turkey, the northern part of what's Syria. That is, interestingly, where the phonetic alphabet concept got started.
Is that right?
And it used to be the Egyptians would use hieroglyphics, but there was a lot of trade that took place, and they found that people had different languages, and so rather than use hieroglyphics, they came up with sound-related symbols.
Yes.
So that your word for tree and my word for tree, we know the sound of it, and we could agree on the way that we'd write those sounds.
Yes.
So it was an amazing, that was, 2,000 years before
A long time
Christ.
ago.
Really,
Yeah.
and there's actually a community there that we walked around, and
Is that right?
and we things like that. It's an amazing place. The history.
I remember hearing that area was called Phoenicia in the old days.
That would have been the Phoenicians probably in their ships, and it was just a major trading post area, and they would come, and obviously the trade, the Silk Road, a lot of variants came through there, and that's part of the reason why you don't see on this ancient map, you don't see where Palmyra is. It's sort of right about in the middle here.
In the middle there.
It's in the middle, but it was on a trade route, and so it was built up.
Right.
And so we went there. We went a number of places that happen to be in the news now, and a lot of places that are, Aleppo has had serious damage to their souk market, and Damascus, the central old part, hasn't seen a lot of the destruction. But Palmyra is one of those communities that had that's been taken over. The extremists have taken over, and I have fears for some of the people that I met there.
Right. Plus, a place like Palmyra has been destroyed. Parts of it. The ancient Palmyra.
It was a 200, I guess the year 230 A.D. Roman community, and so they had various different things there. But I can't believe they've destroyed everything. I think they've destroyed some temples, and I've been looking to see what they might have destroyed. We have some pictures, and you see you have a few pictures up there of what Palmyra looked like when I was there in March of 2009, before any of this horrific things have
very
happened.
Interesting that you have all these pictures from Syria. Wonderful. You're making yourself a photo album?
I am, and a friend of mine actually, the woman who actually guided us, she just came out with a book called Syria Remember Me, which is her memories of, her pictures from 1991 through now.
1991.
Because she met her husband in Syria. She was teaching at the American University, and Damascus.
Right, and she was the one that you met in Vermont?
That I met in Vermont, involved in a theater group. She's a singer, piano player. She's a musician, and a free spirit and a very spiritual person.
Wonderful.
And so she's just come out. Her name is Deborah Felmuth, and she's just come out with this book.
What's her name again?
Her name is Deborah Felmuth. Deborah Felmeth, and her book is Syria, Remember Me, and she's
Syria, Remember Me.
taken photographs. It just came out.
Hold it up so we can see it.
Let's see if we can do that.
There
How
we
about
go.
like that?
Is that a picture of her with a child of hers?
That's not. This is a picture she took.
Oh, I see. Okay,
You know, there's
right.
a picture of her in the back. You can't see it's just her with a group of people.
I see, but so these are all pictures she took in Syria.
Yes, over
about
the course-
20 years ago.
Over a course of, no, she took them through when all this bad stuff was happening. So these were taken 1991 through 2010, and her and her husband have not been able to return to Damascus during all these troubles.
Is she in Vermont now?
She's in Vermont. She has a home in Vermont, and they would have spent, usually they would spend their winters in Damascus and their summers in Vermont, and they have not been able to return to Damascus during this unrest.
Right, and it's...
They're hopeful of, I went to the book launch, they're hopeful of returning in the spring because they think these discussions that are going on now with the Russians and all the various parties that are looking for a solution to focus just their attention on the ISIS militants and not on Bashar al-Assad.
Well, I must admit that I've never been able to figure out what was going on in Syria. I mean, usually you can tell. I mean, for instance, the Kuwait War that I mentioned before, where Dr. Rida, when he was in Kuwait, it was pretty clear. You know, Saddam Hussein from Iraq had thought that he ought to take over Kuwait, which is just a tiny little country right at the top of the Persian Gulf and, you know, on the eastern side of Arabia. And in 1991, after Saddam Hussein's army took over Kuwait, then the United States led armed forces against them and pushed the people out. And I can remember that day that the war started in Kuwait because it was one of those things that the first George Bush, you know, George Bush Sr. Was president at the time in 1991. And he promised that it was like January 15th, I think, that American forces were going to go in if Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces didn't leave. And, you know, I saw the sun going down, and it was that time, it was just that time that the war started, which was a very brief war because, I mean, after all, Kuwait and Iraq weren't really prepared for real onslaught from the American Army and Air Force and so on. But
well, the guide that we had on our trip had done a lot of work with the UN, and he recommended that I read a book called A Peace to End All Peace. I think it's The Peace to End All Peace or A Peace to End All Peace, and it's about World War I.
Oh dear.
And because Syria is somewhat of an artificial construct,
Yes.
along with all the countries that were created at the end of World War I.
That's true.
So to really inform yourself about what's going on right now there, that book really gave me a foundation of the history of how the British and the French really had manipulated people into divvying up the goods there in that, you know, who was going to get what part of the area as a mandate. And they made some decisions about how Syria was going to be, and in fact they gave away a portion. Obviously the Ottoman Empire, you know, lost Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. So Turkey got a portion of what might have been considered Syria if you're going to want to keep it together as a group. That book really, in a lot of ways, informs my perspective on what's going on in Syria. And the other thing, too, is that Bashar al-Assad's father was a brutal dictator as well. And he was raising one of his older sons to be the leader, and the son died in an automobile accident. So Bashar was in ophthalmology school in England, and he's told, come back and you're going to be the new one. And in fact, the whole infrastructure that the father had in place of the military and their way of doing things, I think, stayed in place when this young man came back who really wasn't terribly well prepared to lead that situation. Because when I was there, they were trying to make better connections to the West, and they had constantly been, we sort of have, our country has been demonizing, obviously his father and then him, and it's just sort of all been going on endlessly.
Yeah.
And so he was claiming all these insurgents were coming into his country right from the get-go. And everybody said, he's just trying to, get away with things. And he's a brutal man. He's got, I think, a brutal security apparatus, a military apparatus that probably is, it's all in the mix. But I wonder if, how much he's able to even propose things that would make things, and so he's sort of in the middle of that. And then we have, I think when we went into Iraq and we sort of told all the military leaders in the Iraqi army that you're out the door,
right.
Well, those happen to be all the ones that are providing the military expertise now as the head of ISIS. And so we have created much of this, but it goes back to World War I. We're still fighting World War I, as far as I'm concerned. We're still divvying up the goods down there from World War I.
One of my favorite books was Revolt in the Desert, which was written by T.E. Lawrence. He was Lawrence of Arabia because he was an English officer who had background in the Middle East. He was a scholar from Oxford. He knew the languages and so on, and he was the one who helped to get revolt from the Ottoman Empire, led by Turkey, because Turkey was the ally of Germany, which was fighting the First World War against Russia, France, eventually the U.S., but England, and it was a terrible thing. And have you ever seen Lawrence of Arabia, the film?
I have not, but the story told about the Lawrence of Arabia story in the Peace to End All Peace. What's interesting is that he was told to bring all the Syrians and the Pan-Arabs into helping on the Allied side,
right, yes.
And with the promise of self-determination at the end, when in fact, apparently behind the scenes, the British and the French were already deciding how the spoils would be
right. Well, and Syria got taken by France, whereas Palestine was the mandate, they called it, of England.
Right, and they worked that out, and they weren't very respectful of Woodrow Wilson, the U.S. president at the time, but they were saying, peace, League of Nations, all great, but they were just busy trying to get there. And so it's interesting to me to hear the British talk about how they want to be, or Tony Blair, I want to be the diplomat, and I'm like, if you know World War I history, that doesn't make any sense. So the Lawrence of Arabia story, people try to rewrite that to make it look certain ways. And I'm no expert in the Middle East, but I did read that book, The Peace to End All Peace, which then led me to read many other books along those lines to go about Woodrow Wilson's side of it, and because you really do need to do your own research, because the stories you hear from one side are really maybe not the full story.
The whole 20th century, really stemmed from World War I. I mean, the communists came to power in Russia, became the Soviet Union, There were so many things that determined what happened in the 20th century because of World War I. I'm wondering, do we have any more pictures of Syria, beautiful Syria, Matt?
We can maybe see a few of the pictures that were
Let's see
scenery. We had the ones that were these are from Palmyra, again.
Palmyra.
And then we have Palmyra, and then we have a few architectural details from different places in Damascus and some of the other places that I went. So I probably can't explain all. This is artwork that is in various places. I mean, it's historically, if you are somebody that understands architecture and art, you would be able to understand. This is another view in Palmyra. And this one is actually a photograph of the Euphrates River at an area up near where Raqqa is, which is where the current headquarters, claimed headquarters.
Let me say something about the Euphrates. From this ancient map, you see these two rivers. This is the Tigris, and this is the Euphrates. And ancient Babylon was down here between the two, at one near this narrow point. Modern day Baghdad is very close by, right up here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's only 25 miles between those two rivers at that place. But that was the ancient Near East.
Cradle of civilization.
Yeah, cradle of civilization. Fertile Crescent, supposedly, there was good land up in here that got some rain and so on. They called it the Fertile Crescent. This is the Euphrates River.
This is the Euphrates River, and there are lots of dams. There's going to be pressure, like everywhere, on water issues.
Water issues.
And so there's quite a few dams that are blocking the Euphrates, and so there's plenty of issues, but this was the Euphrates River.
Right. Let's see if there are any more pictures. Well,
this is a marketplace.
Yes.
That was from this is going into one of the markets. There's lots of wonderful markets. We spent so much time walking around various markets. This is Palmyra. It's actually a huge expanse, and they
Roman ruins.
Roman ruins from about 230 AD.
Have been destroyed by the ISIS people.
I think it's hard to know which ones because nobody wants to go there and take pictures and figure it out. These are all these are ruins that are up toward the area, up toward where the Euphrates is. This happens to be a museum in Damascus, the Damascus Museum. And this is sort of just a street scene.
So a narrow
There's
street.
lots of narrow streets. And this is sort of driving through. We drove through. This was actually driving on the way to the Euphrates area. We drove through many areas that are just sort of deserts and people that have their...
This is
and
something
interesting. In Damascus, there's many buildings that are somewhat, a little bit unkempt. And this is a little kitty that was sitting in the window of one. But there's a lot of buildings. It looks like they've had earthquakes at various times, and a lot of the work hasn't been renovated. So this is the inside.
Museum or
this is actually
mosque?
inside of a what would have been called a caravanserai, which is where they would have had people gather to go to market. So and people would stay there. So this is Bedouin tents out in the prairie, out in the when we're just driving across, and this is actually a little market. The night that I arrived, the next morning, I looked out the window, and there was a little. This would be one of your little corner markets, and the kids were busy buying candy, and this is there's a lot of what do you call it? Not parquet, but it's sort of stone mosaic.
Right.
So.
Well, it's wonderful to see these pictures, and I know you have a whole album full from Syria in its better days.
Yes.
And we can only hope that maybe peace will come again at last.
My friends who live there they're optimistic. They say the Syrians are like water. If we were blocked one direction, we'll find another way. We'll find another way. So they're hopeful.
That's good. My guest today has been Solveig. That's
I don't pronounce the G,
name, right?
Solveig, but I answer to many things that are like that.
Norwegian name, Overby, and I've known her a long time and her folks, and it's so glad you could be with me today on Women Today and Yesterday. This is Lois Whaley.